Definition may be the most beloved game show ever produced in Canada. Another game show born in the 70s also held great promise, but instead it goes down in history as a cautionary tale.
Pitfall is kind of a notorious disaster in the history of game shows. The thing is, on the surface, it's a fun show.
This is a show that happened 40 years ago. People still wonder what happened and why it went horribly wrong.
With network-produced shows like Definition becoming successes on the East Coast, a company called Catalina Productions was hoping to make it big in Western Canada.
Catalina was just, as far as I knew, an independent production company set up in the old film studios in West Vancouver.
The head of Catalina Productions was a guy named Ian McLennan. He was an interesting, kind of eccentric guy.
We nicknamed him the Golden Eagle because on his desk he had a great big golden eagle. I haven't a clue where Ian McLennan is, or his golden eagle.
My role in Catalina Production, I was the founder of it. Well, Catalina Productions was one of the early production companies out on the West Coast that was truly independent and had a focus on the international market.
They were a forerunner in terms of independent production. They just came at it with the wrong model.
Catalina's first show into production was a revival of the canceled American hit Let's Make a Deal, bringing its star Monty Hall back to Canada.
We bit off a big opportunity, but fortunately, we were able to assemble the people, and of course, the talent was there with Let's Make a Deal. It was only a small step to taking the next step and producing another show, and that show happened to be called Pitfall.
Pitfall, I truly believe, was the biggest and best visual spectacle ever in Canadian game show history.
Pitfall was probably one of the craziest, most ridiculous game shows ever, where the star of the show was really the set.
This set moves away and you have this huge bank of elevators. First, you had to watch a light show.
Pitfall was a bit of a strange show. It was a question and answer game that involved this elaborate set of elevators. They had to be brought back up by answering a question correctly.
Catalina recruited a face familiar to Canadians to be the host of what they thought would be an instant classic.
I ask questions, you give me answers.
The host of the show was a very young Alex Trebek. This is obviously before Jeopardy came along.
He took his job very seriously, and in reality, we didn't take it as seriously as we should. One time, I was trying to word a question about the Seven Dwarfs in a way that was clever, and I screwed it up in terms of how many dwarves there were. And Alex very seriously looked me dead in the eye and said, "Do you know where I would be today if I didn't know how many dwarves Snow White had?" And I said, "Hosting a Canadian game show."
With the perfect host, a unique format, and a stunning set, all the elements were there for another Canadian game show success story. But there was cause for concern before Pitfall was even out of rehearsals.
The original concept of Pitfall, as I understand it, was to do it with celebrities, with comedians who would answer questions in a kind of Hollywood Squares type way. And they were all warned to be very careful with the elevators because they could hurt themselves.
They were all told explicitly, do not jump up and hold the cage you're in. But one of the actors did and had his fingers crushed.
It was a big deal, and I think he threatened legal action. But the joke at the time was maybe they shouldn't call it Pitfall, maybe they should call it Stump the Stars.
Pitfall would dump its star-driven format after learning that celebrities and elevators don't mix. But the high price of production still spelled trouble.
As far as I know, it was probably very expensive because you had the huge studio space, you had a studio audience, you had the actual set, which must have been very expensive to construct.
There were a lot of productions that were being done simply to take advantage of the tax credits, and they didn't really care what the show was. And I think Pitfall was probably an example of that. Although again, I qualify that by saying I was only a floor director back there, and I'm a producer now, and I can see now in retrospect how these things were happening.
Their appetite was far too big for the realities of the money they had.
As time went on with Catalina, we did realize this is probably one of their first forays into actually producing television. And in the end, it was sort of their downfall.
The vice president of production was a guy named Bill Armstrong. And he came to me one day and he said, "You know, I've got good news and bad news." And he had this booming announcer's kind of voice. And he said, the good news is they paved the parking lot. I said, oh, that's great. The bad news is they've repossessed the company cars.
With more than $200,000 outstanding from their payment for Let's Make a Deal, Monty Hall and producer Stephen Hatos sued Catalina, forcing them into bankruptcy.
My experience with Catalina, they hired me as the vice president of sales and marketing, and I think 7 weeks later they went broke.
All of Catalina failed. Pitfall was just one of the shows that failed.
It's also one of the greatest tragedies of Canadian game show history because a good chunk of the contestants and Alex himself never got compensated for their hard work.
Unfortunately, its legacy now is a bounced paycheck that Alex Trebek has had framed and has hanging up on display in his office.
That's the only time in my life someone has stiffed me for hosting or doing work on a program. Not a pleasant memory.
Alex would recover well and just 2 years later booked the career opportunity of a lifetime, Jeopardy.
I guess after the fact, it's like buying a ticket on the Titanic. You know, you think you're on for a pleasure cruise and you don't know there's going to be an iceberg. That's not your focus. Your focus is to do your job. If you could foresee a disaster, people would never get on the Titanic.
Well, ultimately, we never got the last 2 or 3 weeks worth of our salary and the tax that never got paid to the government. And in our naivety, we said, well, we're not leaving until we get paid. So we basically all went down to the lobby and sat there. And we informed the press.
We call it business risk. That's what it is. Unfortunately, we ran smack into it back in that early 1980 time period. But that's when interest rates went up to 24 and 25%. A lot of changes took place in a very difficult marketplace at that time.
I think largely it had to do with the economy at the time, and that was catastrophic. My ability to go out and continually raise money from people who were struggling to pay their mortgage payments and everything. I had a wife who was pregnant, and I just bought a new house, and I didn't have a job.
And Catalina committed the ultimate game show no-no. The contestants never got the prizes they won on the show.
They were giving out all these supposed prizes to people, cash prizes and merchandise and things like that. And in the end, they didn't actually get those prizes.
The people you hire have to be paid. The contestants, if you're doing a game show, have to get their prizes.
There would be nothing that we could have done differently. There's no guarantee. There are things that happen that you have no control over in life. You have no control over the economy.
I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't have big budgets. I always made sure my folks got paid. Producing a television project is like any other business.
Pitfall may go down in history as the ultimate what-if story.
If there was any way to put that show back on the air, I would be the first one to set my DVR for it.